I'm Rex Brynen, so I'm only one of the four designers behind We Are Coming Nineveh. The others being Juliette Lemenehaz, Harrison Brewer, and Brian Train. What I'll be doing today is talking about the game and the battle. So what the game is about and why we've modeled those things the way we have in the game. And for some reason, there we go. So We Are Coming Nineveh is and it's going ahead. There we go. We Are Coming Nineveh is a tactical operational level war game of the liberation of West Mosul from Daesh or ISIS control by the Iraqi security forces in February to July 2017. The game originates with Juliette, who you'll see there on the top left, who at the time was a student of mine at McGill, who conveniently was working both on a thesis on the Iraqi security forces and was in my war game design class, and really wanted to do a game highlighting the central role that the Iraqi security forces played in the fight against Daesh. She was joined by another student in that course, Harrison Brewer, who knew less about Iraq but more about wargaming. I was their prof, and they produced a really outstanding game. And Brian Train, who you will see second from the left there, many of you will know for his many wargame designs, later joined us too. The game, we've been very pleased that in the play testing of the game, there was considerable excitement from some of our colleagues who work on professional wargaming. The UK Ministry of Defence asked for one of the demo copies so that they could include it in a study of urban warfare. The US Army keeps harassing me for copies because they want to use it in teaching and so forth. So we've been very pleased with the response, not only from our hobby playtesters, but those involved in professional military education as well. There you see on the right, there's sort of the prototype versions of the game. Of course, we're in the process of finalizing graphics and artwork for the production version. We're doing that over the summer. And Florent can say more about this if he wants, but the hope is that we'll be doing production in the latter half of this year, and it'll be available for purchase early next year. So I'll talk about the battle, I'll talk about the game, and then, of course, after this half hour is over, we'll retire to a We Are Coming Nineveh room, and I'll talk you through a few turns on the Vassal module, which isn't quite finished, but certainly is finished enough for me to use it today for demonstration purposes. So let's talk about the Battle of Mosul. Mosul, second largest city in Iraq, or certainly was at the time it was captured by Daesh, was captured by Daesh very rapidly, routing Iraqi security forces in 2014. There followed a long campaign in which initially Daesh advanced rapidly in Sunni areas of Iraq, then were pushed back, and really the battle for the city went on through 2016 and 2017, late 2016, October, November, through to the summer of 2017. And indeed, it was some of the most intense urban warfare since the Korean War and World War II, with in excess of 20,000 deaths and probably 60 to 100,000 injured. Roughly 1,000 Iraqi security force deaths, 5 coalition deaths of those providing support, both U.S. and Iranian. Perhaps 10,000 Daesh soldiers, fighters lost their lives. We don't really know. And perhaps 10,000 civilians died, because although many people had evacuated the city, there were still a lot of people living in it at the time of the military operations. Now, the game itself focuses on the very last phase of the battle for Mosul. It focuses on the liberation of West Mosul, including the sort of densely built labyrinthine, alleys, small roads, passageways, and so forth that comprise the old city, the medieval part of the city. So the game is not about the fighting for Mosul through all of 2017. It's really about the last push, the last stand by Daesh in West Mosul, particularly in the old city, in February to July 2017. Now, this will come out when we talk about the game design, but this is an area that you could drive across in under perfect conditions in 15 minutes. But it took months and months and months and months of house-to-house combat to finally clear the old city of jihadist fighters. So let me say a little bit more about the battle. There you can see some images from the fighting in West Mosul. Some of those in particular on the top are scenes from the old city. You can see that that is not the kind of terrain where you're going to be able to deploy armored forces, armored personnel carriers. It's a lot of fighting on foot. This map shows you the general campaign through 2016, 2017 for the city of Mosul. The green square shows you the part that is represented in the game for February through July. And this part here, where you see the sort of final operations, there's the front line in July, in the summer, June, July of 2017. That is the old city. So that is the part that is going to be hardest to capture. Daesh understandably made their last stand there precisely because of the difficulty of mounting assault operations in that particular area. Now, the battle for Mosul, and that image, by the way, isn't an actual image from the battle for Mosul. That's from the movie Mosul, which is really, really good. It gives you a sense of the fighting in the city. Filmed, a Hollywood movie, but filmed entirely in Arabic. They even got the Iraqi dialect right for the most part. During the battle, obviously, the coalition, the United States, France, Britain, Canada, other countries provided support. Intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, training, air and indirect fire support. And a lot of that was quite high tech. Drones, UAVs, precision guided munitions, some sophisticated intelligence collection. At the same time, the Iranians provided very substantial support, training and equipping Iraqi units, both Iraqi government units and the militias of the Popular Mobilization Force, which is kind of quasi-government volunteer force that did an awful lot of the fighting against Daesh. But a key point is the vast bulk of the fighting and the dying was done by the Iraqi army, by the counterterrorism service or the special operations forces of Iraq, and the Interior Ministry, both kind of SWAT teams and regular police, and in some cases, less so in the part of the battle we're talking about, but certainly on the outskirts of the city, the Popular Mobilization Forces. Overall, in the fighting against Daesh, whether in Iraq or in Syria, in excess of 99.5% of everyone who died was Iraqi or Syrian fighting against Daesh. And that sometimes gets forgotten in our media coverage of the war, because in the West, the media coverage tends to be through the lens of what was, after all, very important Western assistance. The battle itself is an interesting combination of technology, overhead surveillance, drones, and so forth. Daesh innovation. Daesh used small quadcopter to drop grenades, for example, but also urban fighting techniques that would have been familiar to veterans of Stalingrad. So it's an interesting combination of the latest in military hardware and technology and urban fighting techniques that predate World War II. A lot of emphasis on urban fortification, the terrain defined by built space and major thoroughfares. The fighting chunked up into neighborhoods and then crossing major thoroughfares becomes the next phase of an operation. The ease of infiltration and the fluidity of front lines, particularly in dense urban space where you don't have long lines of sight, where there are tunnels and there are holes in walls and there are rooftops, and there's all kinds of ways for units to get in very close proximity and even intermixed. And also, as in all military operations, but I think particularly true in the fighting against Daesh, there was a political backdrop to all of this. What is success? Obviously, one metric of success is actually physically eliminating Daesh fighters in the city and liberating it. But what cost are you prepared to pay to do that? Do you run a speedy operation, even if it means you blow up a lot of the city? Do you take your time and try to reduce collateral damage or your own casualties if you're Iraq? And how does Daesh spin that? This was a battle which the jihadists knew they were going to lose, but wanted to spin as a victory. So the more damage they could inflict on the Iraqi army, the longer it took to clear West Mosul, the more the Iraqi army destroyed its own city and the liberation of that city. Those are all things that Daesh could hope to spin off as a political victory out of the wreckage of what was an inevitable military defeat. So these are all things we needed to keep in mind when we were doing the game design. I'm just going to see if this will play. It might have some bandwidth issues. If it doesn't, we won't watch it. This is a Sky News video. Is it going to play for me? I think Discord doesn't want it to play. Okay, let's see if we can get past it. Come on. Oh, maybe it will. Let's see if that's going to play for you. So this is the fighting in the old city. Literally throwing grenades, and that doesn't look like very safe practice to me for basic training, over walls into adjacent courtyards.
This is apocalyptic stuff. It's one step away from hand-to-hand combat. You virtually never see this type of thing in modern warfare because this isn't.
And you can see why no one's deploying vehicles in those streets. You couldn't take them anywhere. So let me move past that. That's on YouTube if you want to see the whole thing. It's a Sky News report. And indeed, much of the fighting in the actual city was not done by the Iraqi army because the Iraqi army couldn't get its vehicles in. It was done by Special Operations Forces, the Counterterrorism Service, or it was done by Iraqi police. That was an Iraqi police unit. If you watch the movie Mosul, that's also about an Iraqi SWAT team's operations in Mosul. It's this highly fictionalized version of a real story of the movie. So how does the game actually operate? Well, one thing we needed in the game was a lot of fog of war. Not only are you fighting an insurgent that is hiding amongst the terrain and hiding amongst the population, but you're operating an environment where it is difficult to see. There's a lot of overhead cover. There's a lot of narrow alleys, particularly in the old city. So we needed a lot of fog of war. You will see it there. That's why we went for a block game. The beginning of the game, there are 3 metrics that we're tracking for victory in the game. How long it takes you to liberate the old city, the amount of collateral damage that you've inflicted on Iraq, that's been inflicted on Mosul, and the number of casualties that the Iraqis take in liberating West Mosul. At the beginning of the game, all of those will count for victory points, but at the beginning of the game, each side decides which is most important to itself. The Iraqis want to go as fast as possible to claim a political victory that they liberated the city quickly, or they want to go cautiously to keep their casualties or civilian casualties down. So you each choose one of those metrics that's going to be more important to you. It'll be of double value when the game ends. And in addition to the core units you have a number of points to spend on additional units and additional capabilities. So you're not just given the Battle of West Mosul and you immediately play it out with exactly what they had in July. You make some of the decisions that were made weeks or months earlier about, am I going to emphasize indirect fires, or am I going to keep them to a minimum? Am I going to enhance the capabilities of my troops with stepped up training? Do I want to invest in intelligence collection? Or if you're on the Daesh side, there are other kinds of things. And you will obviously want to configure your force and your training and your capabilities for the kind of battle you're trying to fight on the two sides. And then, of course, you deploy to play the game properly. On the Daesh side, what might you've invested in? Well, additional units. You could start arming children, child soldiers, Ashbal, lion cubs. You can invest in additional IEDs, explosives, mortars, technicals, so armed vehicles, a bit hard to use in this case. Stay behind forces, so units that are designed to be bypassed and then pop out of cellars or tunnels or what have you in the rear area of the Iraqi security forces. You can invest in IED factories so that you're actively building more IEDs as the battle is going on. You can pre-position arms caches to enhance your supply, maybe even allow you to arm additional units. And you can invest in a media center to broadcast your message and allow you to frame what's going on in the battle. That's in addition to your core units, your veterans, and your militia, and the IEDs you'll start the game with in every case. There are also capabilities. Do you want to invest in more training for your Daesh fighters? Do you want more snipers? Do you want man pads? Do you want to use more suicide vests? The assumption is not that you're not using these things, but are there things you want to particularly use? Do you want drones? Do you want to experiment with chemical weapons, which was done a little, but not with any effectiveness in the battle for Mosul? How much fortification? Do you want to build mouse holes, knock down walls so that you can move between adjacent buildings? Do you want tunnels? Do you want mines? And here I mean the sort of classic mine of putting explosives at the end of a tunnel and detonating it under the enemy's forces, which is being used somewhat in Iraq, a great deal in Syria. Do you want to fortify buildings? Do you want smuggling networks to keep your supply lines open? Do you want spy networks? Do you want escape plans that allow you to withdraw your forces from the battle at the end so they kind of slip their head out of the noose? You're having to make a decision about what extra things you want to bring to the fight. On the ISF side, you're making similar decisions. You have the units of the 9th Armored Division, very powerful, but they can't enter the old city. You have the CTS. You have Ministry of Interior troops, both your SWAT type troops and your more regular police. You can get more army personnel if you want. You can get PMF militia. There you see Popular Mobilization Forces in the illustration in the background. Do you want to do more training on urban warfare, on rules of engagement to keep civilian casualties down, on dealing with explosive ordnance, unexploded munitions, mines, IEDs? Do you want to invest in better logistics, better coordination, better humanitarian access, better casualty evacuation, better intelligence collection? Do you want to change your operational plans and do some things that weren't done? Do you want to attack more quickly than the real attack? Do you want to put more effort into flanking to the west and the northwest? Do you want to do amphibious insertion across the Tigris River or a heliborne insertion? Do you want to plan a pause in the middle of your operations to regroup and resupply, which is something most war games don't include, but actual warfare tends to be episodic. You launch an assault, it peters out, you re-equip, you move units around, and then you have another go. You've got air support, artillery support, both coalition and Iraqi. You've got coalition forward personnel helping you with the spotting, or Iranian advisors helping your PMF militia. You have all those decisions to make. What do you want to do to enhance your core units when you go into the fight? And again, that will depend on what kind of fight you want. Gameplay is actually very simple. I play this game all the time with students who have zero wargaming experience, and they pick it up very quickly. In the support phase, you'll do fire supports. You'll use some of those capabilities that you've purchased. Then you'll move your units. Then you will fight. And there's a few interesting things we have in there. I'll show you how the movement and fighting works in a minute. If during the combat phase you roll sometimes a 1 and sometimes a 6, there'll be a series of event cards. They will have either a 1 or a 6 on top of them. And if you roll that, you'll draw the event card. And these are a whole series of kind of generally micro-tactical vignettes, often where the player has to make a decision. In this particular case, the Iraqi player has to decide if they want to stop fighting in this particular area. As you can see, it's an area map, or if they want to continue doing so and suffer collateral damage because there are civilians in the way. So there's lots of kinds of tactical vignettes that we've introduced into the game through these event cards. They also reward you or penalize you for certain decisions. So you might run into unexploded munitions, which will be more of a problem if you haven't invested in EOD capability. There might be things that will reward you if you've invested in field hospitals and casualty evacuation, or penalize you if you failed to invest in coordination across the different formations you have. We penalize trying to operate units from multiple headquarters in the same urban district because they tend to get in each other's ways. You have headquarters that can do special things, enhance your combat, enhance your movement, in some cases take step losses off and so forth. We do have supply rules. It's fairly easy to stay in supply for the Iraqi army. It's In the case of Daesh, there are Daesh forces to the north of the map we're using, and so you want to maintain communications with those, because as you do, it's not so much running out of supply, it's that some of your regular fighters start slipping away as the noose tightens. And so if you lose supply as a Daesh player, you will start taking step losses on your lower quality units, simply because those people are trying to get out of the battle, as it's clear that their escape is being cut off. At the end of the game, you calculate victory. You add up those metrics, you find out which metrics each side has decided to place greater emphasis on, and those count double. Interestingly, we have built into the game, not only do we tell you how well you did relative to the actual battle, but we sometimes victory is ambiguous. And the rules will actually say, well, technically you've lost, but you inflicted so many casualties on the Iraqi security forces that you can claim you won anyway. Because that's the nature of these kinds of battles. It's not always crystal clear who's won. But generally you could tell who's won at the end of the game from a wargaming point of view, if not from a political science point of view at the end of the game. Whoops, I may have accidentally double-clicked this. So this is the prototype map. This isn't the production map. Whoops, and I hit it twice, so I'll have to go back. The Discord lags my PowerPoint, so that's why it sometimes takes a while to go back. There we go. Okay, I hope I haven't done it twice now. So let me tell you what you're seeing on that map. So we went for area movement because that's the way urban fighting tends to occur. It tends to occur in neighborhoods broken up by major thoroughfares. You'll see that those areas are coated with white, gray, or black circles. That is how densely built they are, and that affects your stacking limit. So the old city has those black circles. You can only put 2 units in there. That means it's very hard to get overmatch. And in fact, most of the operations research on urban fighting finds that the odds ratios don't matter once you get into dense urban terrain. So we wargamers are all used to CRTs, you need 3-to-1 to better. But actually, when you do research on urban fighting, odds ratios don't make too much difference in dense urban terrain, because you can't bring that advantage to bear. Movement is zone to zone to reflect the fact that it took months to liberate this area. But you'll see major thoroughfares there, and essentially you can move as far as you can move on a major thoroughfare in a single turn, provided it's not blocked by someone else. So the Iraqis could theoretically stop at the bottom of the map and move all the way up along that yellow line if there were no enemy forces abutting it. So what Daesh will try to do is they'll try to keep blocking forces to prevent the major thoroughfares from being opened. There you see with the newer artwork, a unit. Super easy combat. It just tells you what roll you're going to need to hit the enemy when you're in the same zone, when you're doing combat. And when you get hit, you will rotate it 1 to indicate you're taking casualties. And when you run out of rotations, that unit is dead. If it gets badly injured, that's going to count towards casualties at the end of the game too. So you don't want your units getting too chewed up. In practice, CTS units fought with in excess of 70% casualties without being taken out of the line for months on end, which is really very, very impressive. So that's what the prototype map looks like. That's what a block looks like in the bottom right. Now, I'm rapidly going to run out of time here, but fortunately, I've come to the end of the presentation. I will show off a lot more in the Vassal module in a few minutes when we're finished here. There's some stuff on the game development on the PackSims blog, so I've got the URL there. But in the meantime, I will stop sharing my screen, and I will see what questions may have stop streaming. There we go, and I'll see what questions may have shown up. So I'll have to do some dragging of windows around here. But are there any questions verbally anyone wants to ask?
Hi, Rex. I have a question for you, please.
Yes, please.
I think one of the most difficult aspects is to model the different rate of casualties between, let's say, regular forces and Daesh forces. How you manage this in the game?
Well, we've done that largely by fudging the unit sizes. So you'll if you look at the game, you'll see they've got the sort of standard battalion markers for the Iraqi formations and standard company markers for the Daesh forces. In practice, the way units deployed was much fuzzier than that. So they tended to be sort of task forces around companies with a lot of informal cross attachment and so on and so forth. So in effect, the Iraqis are going to be taking more casualties because a step loss to the Iraqis represents more actual bodies that are killed or injured than on the Daesh side. The Daesh side also has to really worry about their veteran fighters. They need to watch that they don't lose them too early. They are much better in the old city than some of their other forces. They do not start defecting towards the end when the old city gets surrounded and you've cut off supply. And similarly, on the government side, you have to be careful you don't grind up your CTS forces too early, because you cannot use your Iraqi army units in the old city, because in fact, the old city was not largely liberated by the Iraqi army because they couldn't get their equipment in, because they were built around armored or mechanized infantry units, or at least Humvees and wheeled transport. The CTS is by far the best to do it, but you can attrit it too early and then find yourself having difficulties with the break-in. The Interior Ministry emergency response division troops, so kind of SWAT teamish troops, paramilitaries, are okay. The police are not very good, but the police are really useful for backfilling liberated areas to prevent Daesh from re-infiltrating into them. So you want to, the police units actually become quite important, because if you don't use them sensibly, you suddenly think that neighborhoods you've cleared, stuff starts popping up and threatening your headquarters or your retreat lines and so on and so forth. So we've modeled casualties in essentially different unit sizes and different durabilities as well.
Thanks.
I got one. I don't know if my terms will be all right. How would you describe the impact, if it's the right word, of having a woman in the design process? Because you and I both know, we're part of the Zenobia Awards. So for me, it's an important aspect of the game. But actually, I've never asked you this. So,
no, it's a great question, and Juliet can't be here today, but really it was her idea, because she specializes in conflict in the Middle East. She's a graduate student now at LSE. She speaks Arabic, and she thought that the story had just not been told of how difficult this fight was for the Iraqi security forces, and how the lion's share of the fighting having been done by them. Now, at university, it was not a problem for her. I teach a war game design class at McGill, and typically 40%, sometimes 50%. For next year, it's 50% of the students are female. That's not unusual. I mean, it's a political science class. Over half of political science students are probably female these days. And it's a very, I think, supportive environment. So that year, over half the students in the war game design class, in fact, were female. She had a bit of culture shock when she went to other places to demo it. Like, really? You designed a war game? How could you have designed a war game? Well, I study this for a living. So she has run into that issue at times when demoing it, where people just don't believe that a young woman has designed a war game about something as gritty and bloody and difficult as Mosul, despite the fact that she has a degree focusing on conflict in the Middle East. She did her thesis in Middle Eastern Studies. She wrote her thesis on the Popular Mobilization Forces. She's now doing graduate work on conflict in the Middle East, and she speaks Arabic, but she sometimes in sort of convention or demo settings runs into a bit of a culture shock. But universities tend to be different environments, and professional wargaming settings tend to be somewhat different settings. So she's found when she's demoing it at the Connections UK conference that people don't find it quite so strange, because the proportion of wargamers in the hobby is about 1% female. in the military and the national security environment, it's about 15%. And as I say, at university, it's 40%. So slightly different worlds. But she would be the one to talk about it. So I hope if Juliette sees this recording, she thinks I've characterized her experience correctly.
No,
yeah, but I am wearing a Darby House pin here for diversity and inclusion in professional wargaming. So
for me, actually, it's an advantage from my point of view of a publisher. It's so unusual, and I want to promote that. So actually, yeah, it is an advantage, and something that we want to put more in front. And if other, my involvement in Zenobia.
Yeah.
So, I like that idea of having more different people than the usual.
There's a powerful role model. There's a powerful role model effect where I have students say to me, female students say to me, or in some cases minority students say to me, this is really cool. I didn't know you could do this. And when they see, others doing it, then that's super positive. So actually another student who was one of my students at McGill is now a wargame designer for the Canadian Forces Joint Warfare Center in Ottawa to Brania Proseviet. And that just inspires, I think, as I say, yeah, I could do this. I didn't, it wasn't something I had thought of before, but look, there's a role model out there. I can do it. And thanks for supporting Zenobia. For those listening who don't know what the Zenobia Award is, it's an award for game designs, historical board game designs from groups that are currently underrepresented amongst historical board game designers. Any other questions? If not, I guess, Florent, I will retire to the We Are Coming Nineveh room, and if anyone wants to follow, I will show off the Vassal module. We can play through a couple of turns just so people can see in more detail how it works.
Sorry, just one last question.
Sure.
Yeah. How Brian Train came into the process of the maybe not the design, but of the test of the game?
Yeah, so Brian, well, the short answer to Brian is I've known Brian since Brian was in high school. so Brian was the kid who used to show up at my university wargaming club many decades ago. Brian came in partly, for several reasons. Brian is an outstanding game designer. He was interested in the project. He really liked the game. He brought in a different perspective, and I think it was really valuable for the students to network with Brian and to gain his expertise as well. Helped clarify and straighten some things, rule sequences, and so on and so forth. Did a lot of the play testing with us and so on and so forth. But anyone who knows Brian's games will know that Brian is just a brilliant, innovative game designer. And anyone who knows Brian Train personally will know he's just the nicest guy and extremely generous with his time. He's spoken to my students before too as well. So the real answer is Brian is just a really nice guy, and he was perfectly willing to help out, and that benefited the project, and it benefited Juliette Harrison in particular as neophyte newbie game designers.
Okay, maybe